Welcome, everybody, to the Eon podcast. And we're joined by the one and only, the message and the money, Mr. Immortal Technique. How are you, sir?
I'm fine, thank you very much. How you doing?
We're good. I would like to start off the podcast with a bit of a story. I want to tell you about how, as a young kid growing up in Pakistan, I was first introduced to your music. And it was actually through a very good friend of mine who lives in this part of Pakistan called Quetta. We live in Lahore, which is like one of the major cities apart from Karachi. And this friend of ours, he lived in Quetta in Balochistan, which unfortunately is one of the least developed provinces in Pakistan. It
Mm.
borders Iran and Afghanistan, and it's very underdeveloped, and there's a lot of violence over there. So this guy belonged to like the Hazara tribe, and he was in a very underdeveloped part of the country, and yet somehow, like living in like this mountain village of Quetta, he developed like a huge affinity for hip hop. And like it
Mm.
was in the clothes he wore and like the way he spoke. Like he used to wear like these baggy clothes, and he
Mm.
used to run in his free time. I don't know if you remember, there used to be blog spots. They were really big in the early 2000s. So he ran like this blog spot where he would upload, like, I kid you not, they were like rap albums that had maybe 200 or 300 people listening to them total in like the entire world. And so when he came and he met me in Lahore, obviously, like the conversation drifted towards hip hop, and he was like, "What do you listen to these days?" And I used to listen to whatever was on the radio. So I was like, "Yeah, Eminem, Dr. Dre." And he was like, "Okay, that's cool, but let me put you on to some real shit." And
Mm.
then he played like some music for me. He played Jedi Mind Tricks from Philadelphia. I think you're acquainted with those guys. He played this group from New
Mhm.
York called the Doppelgangers. But like the
Okay.
first track that he played for me was, sort of to blow my mind, was called The Point of No Return, which is from
Oh,
Revolutionary
okay.
Volume 2. And so, I'm sitting there listening to this track, and you need to understand like the backdrop of me listening to this track because this was 2008 Pakistan. And the general perception at that time was that, Pakistan had sold her soul to the, for dollars basically,
The
to the
American
devil.
Empire, yeah.
Yeah. And the person who had brokered this deal was a military dictator who had ruled Pakistan from like 1999 to 2007, Pervez Musharraf. And at that time, it was absolute sort of pandemonium because we were sort of reaping what we sow during that war on terror stage. And there were bomb blasts and, huge instability in the country. And Aman and I went to the same school. And, I remember one day we were sitting in class and all the windows simultaneously shattered because like a bomb went off
Mhm.
nearby. And at that time, there was this documentary that got hugely popular in Pakistan. It was called The Arrivals. And it was like this eschatological sort of narrative about how the world was ending through like an Islamic sort of paradigm. And, it had like that sort of religious aspect to it. But then there was stuff like, subliminal messaging in Hollywood and music and 9/11 being like sort of this huge satanic ritual and all this stuff.
It was crazy babble, by the way. It was like Zachariah Sitchin type nut job stuff.
It was insane, but it got so big at one point that a mainstream news channel in Pakistan started airing it. So,
Hmm.
like this was like sort of these things were happening simultaneously where I was watching that stuff. And then when I listened to your music, you talking about, the Templars of the Night, finding what was beneath Solomon's temple, and just like mentioning the Illuminati and all this stuff. Uh,
Mm.
it was really a mind blowing sort of thing for us back in the day, and Immortal Technique became for us like this mythical figure who would behead the princes and sheiks. So, and like, And I was thinking back then, like today we take this thing for granted because of like Spotify and everything. But you released that album absolutely, totally independently, without any help from major record labels.
Yeah. The
So
first one was totally independent. I did pretty much jumping from studio to studio myself. The second one, I was still independent. I paid for everything, but then I had some distribution through Viper Records and then through Koch eventually, and then EMI. But yeah, I think my journey as an independent goes from being independent to being very independent. To now it's just me running everything. It's a lot easier to hold down an operation that's of this size with only a skeleton crew. You don't need 40 people working at a record label anymore. I think that the world of music obviously changed a lot because during the 90s, you still had people that would go to studios and record on reels. When things got automated, it changed the game for everyone. I mean, the entire roster of artistry that you see making music today wouldn't exist in the world that I come from, where you couldn't just punch in someone's vocals. You had to go back and re-record over the reel, and then people had to cut the tape and put it together at exactly the right place so that the words would blur together. And now you can do that on a computer program called Pro Tools, which makes things a lot more efficient. I also came at a time in which people were doing what exactly you described and looking down on it, and with a really vile attitude about, oh, you're pirating or you're stealing. And to me, that was not my perspective. I love getting paid through what I do, but initially,
burn
what
it off
started
the
was
internet and
right.
pump it outside.
Essentially, I wanted people to disseminate the message, and there were parts of it that I think um, were using extreme language and extreme examples. But anything that I said or anything that I rapped about, I find myself able to defend pretty well when it comes to people that ask me follow-up questions about that. And they'll say, well, Felipe, how do you feel about being a conspiracy theory artist? And I say, well, okay, let me ask a question. On the records that I have, what were my big conspiracy theories? What, that the Iraq war was based off of lies? We discovered that later on, that that's true, and that was sad. And I saw a video of a Russian tank running over a Ukrainian man, and it was disgusting. It was hurtful to see the waste of human life that way. But why are you so eager to show me that? But you're so uneager to show me all of those Afghans that you blew up, all those people from Somalia and Pakistan you blew up with your drone strikes. Why do I never see their faces? Why do I not even know their names? Are they nameless? Are they worthless? Are they nobody? Well, why did you hide them from me? Why did you not show them to me with the same pride that you showed me the horrific atrocities allegedly that have been committed by people that you're ideologically opposed to or financially opposed to, which is what it really boils down to. And I think that really gave me an awakening, or it is an example of the kind of awakening that I received during the war in Iraq. When I first said, hey, man, what I was looking at the type of stuff that WikiLeaks was releasing beforehand. You just had to dig on the dark web. It wasn't like it was everywhere, but you could find it. And it was extremely disturbing images where you said, this isn't freedom. You're not helping people. You knocked over a country because you could. And you've decided to try and angle out Russia from an arms market. Now, whether or not that's a conspiracy theory, it's true now, right? Russia used to have a monopoly on the arms market in the Middle East. And as a result of 9/11 and our knocking over a series of countries, and then after Bush inviting Mr. Obama to do the same thing. I mean, he won an election against Mr. McCain by purporting to be a progressive. And we ended up with a person that knocked over another 7 countries that definitely flexed the might of American imperialism. And what were we left with? A state that didn't work on its infrastructure. So when I have these kind of discussions about hip hop, I remind people where hip hop comes from. Hip hop comes from mass poverty, and it comes from being able to take anything from that wretched condition and make something that other people envy, right? You took away a broken record player, and what did you do? You created new music with it. And people said, look at these slums that you people come from. Yeah, yeah, but that's not where we're from, right? We actually have a rich history before we were brought to this country and before people were forced to flee wherever they are. And I think that that's important. So whenever we talk about hip hop, remember, even the baggy clothes that your friend wore, that's a jail style. That comes from people that were sent to prison and they didn't want to wear tight clothes for obvious reasons. They didn't want to be targeted and sexually assaulted. And when you wear very tight clothes in jail, you give people the impression that you're open for business. It's sad, but it's true. But when you wear baggy clothes or you wore baggier clothes, people said, oh man, that guy, he must know somebody. He got the hookup. Look at his clothes. They're not tight. They're loose fitting on him. He's relaxed. This is where the actual style comes from. It's sad, but it's true. So it's a very, very clear message to people. This is a culture that comes from struggle. And if we don't speak about struggle, then we're not using it till its full potential. Sure, you can use it to distract people. I'm not one of these purists that you'll speak to. Oh, this other music is haram and it's horrible and it should be banned. No, it's an example of ignorance and societal norms that can affect anybody. Even the most religious person's children can be drawn into that. Any individual that loses their way can be drawn into that swamp of materialism. Even the most righteous person is at some point tested in their life. Otherwise, they're not righteous because they've never been tested. How could a person be righteous, right? Purport to be so unsinful and never have ever encountered anything that Shaitan puts in the way that makes it difficult for you to make a decision, right? How are you righteous if you've never been tested, if you've never had to make a difficult decision? And I think those are the themes that I loved about early, hip hop and what I saw, where it was an actual moral tale. There was something going on. Even with Dance with the Devil, people always bring that song up to me. It's a tale about morality. I can show you the building where it happened, where these people murdered somebody back in the day. And why speak about that? Well, I unless people haven't noticed, I say whatever I want to. And what are those people going to do? Harm me? Expose themselves for being the individuals that were responsible for killing somebody? No, they're not stupid. They're going to shut the fuck up and they're going to die slowly somewhere like they've done so far. Those people are cursed. That's the lesson, right? It's like Star Wars. It seems like, oh man, Darth Vader is so cool. No, he's not. Listen to George Lucas. He's a wretched, miserable, disgusting, lonely, horrible, haunted character. He's not cool. He's a legless, armless, quadruple amputee who thinks he's responsible for killing his wife and child. He's the biggest tragedy in cinematic history, and people think he's cool. He's just an example of everything that's gone wrong and the biggest wasted talent in a galactical history in his universe. And I think that's what people miss.
But he redeems himself in the end, though.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, I said he redeems himself in the end, though. I think
but that's the interesting part. That if there's redemption for an individual like that, see, that makes the story hook. If there's redemption for an individual like that, the whole purpose of every movie is to break the fourth wall. If it doesn't, then it's not impactful. If it doesn't bring a message home to you at some point, oh man, this was really wow. If this guy can redeem him, so you know what I can do? I can call my mother and I can tell her I'm sorry for the things that I know that it's my dad's fault. I know it's his fault for what he did. But as a man, I'm still going to forgive him. And, as long as he's sober, he can be around my children. And then, you find redemption in that. And I think that was what was great about early hip hop. The character arcs, the idea that a person could be a drug dealer and still not be the worst person in the world. Or the idea that a person that's hooked on drugs doesn't have a moral failing. They're just sick. They have a disease. And I think being in a so-called Christian country for years, for decades, we saw in a self-proclaimed Christian country how people are constantly shamed for having a disease. I mean, if you're addicted to heroin, you cannot quit. You cannot quit cold turkey. You'll die. You have to take certain drugs to get off heroin, and that's heroin. Think about a less complex drug, alcoholism. If you're going through pathological organ change, which is the final stages of alcoholism, where your body is now processing alcohol like actual nutrients, and this is like 20, 30 years into alcohol, you cannot quit alcohol. Your body will shut down. You will die. You have to take certain drugs that mimic what alcohol does to your system for years and then get off drugs. This is a physical death. And yet we have so callously and so carefully, meticulously made it seem as if it's a moral failing for people until the demographic shifted, until we had a conversation about who were the bad people, right? And then a rich white American society was forced to look at itself and say, wait, but my kid's not a bad person. He's not a monster, but he's addicted to drugs. He robbed a store. He did this. No, my kid's not like that. Well, then if your kid's not like that, then no one's kid is like that. Because all during the 80s and 90s, when the people who were affected by crack and heroin looked more like me and the people in my community, it was not considered a medical issue. It wasn't considered a disease, which it is. It was considered a moral failing and totally the responsibility of those involved. And unfortunately, we lived by that principle for decades, and it ruined our society in terms of having empathy. And also, the people who judged those drug addicts made the worst mistake of all. They lost the moral argument in the very beginning by assuming the moral high ground, because that's not where they belonged. And by looking down on those people that had, were fighting for their souls, and instead of helping them, laughing at them and kicking them while they were down. It's easy to do, man. I've seen a lot of drug addicts on the street today. It's not an easy thing to fix in our society, but it's something that was easy to cause.
It's interesting because, as a 12, 13-year-old kid, one of the first things that made me sort of, delve deeper into like this drug epidemic was the song Peruvian Cocaine. And, again, that's a track from Revolutionary Volume 2, where, you talk about how the CIA sort of manufactured the drug cartel, or at least it was one of the main sort of buyers or purchasers of drugs.
Mm-hmm.
And then subsequently it was prosecuting its own people who it had previously sold the drugs to for buying and using those drugs. And actually, with a lot of your music, that was the case, that it really opened, a lot of sort of avenues in terms of geopolitics, in terms of just, like understanding things on a different level. Because we were 12, 13-year-old kids. And I think your music actually played a big part in sort of that political awakening that we had.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, and Aman and I think, often discuss this, that, that album encapsulates that time period so well. That sort of paranoia after, 2000, after September 11, the world order shifting, as you say, the devil crept into heaven, the new world order was born on September 11th. And like the Patriot Act and all of this thing. And one thing that I would like to know is, you have like this sort of repeat, or you have another large scale global event happening right now with what's happening in Gaza. And from your perspective, looking back at September 11, do you think that this time things are different, in that it is not so easy to control the narrative for the powers that be as it was before during September 11? Because at that time, with the Bush getting elected, we saw that he had just like a wholesale sort of sweeping approval rating after September 11. And it seems to us, living in Pakistan, that the Americans at that time just bought wholesale
I
what
mean,
the establishment was
not
selling.
exactly wholesale. I mean, first Bush got elected, then he knocked down the towers, and to quote the great Immortal technique himself. But I think the American people didn't buy it wholesale. You had the Iraq War protests, but on the level that we're able to communicate right now. So maybe this conversation wouldn't be happening post 9/11. So the idea is that the American media establishment has a very good a reputation of putting lipstick on pigs, and this time around they're having a very hard time doing it. I mean, you and I are able to have this conversation. We're able to gush about how deeply entrenched your music is into our sort of political awakening and our growth. And one thing I'd like to say myself about Revolutionary Volume 2 is that every single track on that volume is ominous. That's the exact word I would use to describe them. They captured the spirit of the 2000s because that's what everything felt like, ominous.
I think when I made those type of statements, they were the first ones that got challenged. Like when people said, "Oh, technique, how can you say that? What, the CIA controls the drug trade? Here's another conspiracy theory." And I said, "Well, okay, here's the truth. In my country, in Peru, I can give you one prime example. When the dictator Fujimori came to power, he had two big problems. He had a group of Maoist leftist guerrillas that had splintered off into various groups, and he had a drug cartel problem because everyone understands the American lexicon of saying, "Oh, look, Colombian drug lord." We've all heard that. It's in all these movies, but very rarely do people say Peruvian drug lord. We don't hear that as often, and yet Peru moves just as much cocaine as Colombia. And I think that without that fundamental understanding, people miss the fact that Fujimori came in, made a deal with the people that sold drugs, and copied their tactics. Went from place to place, building wells and roads. And why do drug dealers have so much success in rural areas? Why aren't they turned in by the local population? And the reason is because they end up doing more for the infrastructure of those places than the government. They build a bridge so their drug trucks can go through it. And it just so happens that people are able to get to work and see their family, or they fix a road, or they build a hospital or a school. And, I think that that's the way government operates too, like a drug cartel. They build something nice for the people when they're finally under pressure. They come clean about what they did wrong when they're finally under pressure, but they never do any of this alone. This requires public pressure. It requires human interaction, right? It reminds me of why people are religious. Whether you take the Quran, whether you take the Torah, whether you take the Bible, all of these three documents, whether you believe in one and don't believe in the other two, or you believe in all of them, the truth is that all those documents are subjective documents, which means they require human interpretation for existence. Without us being here, it would just be a book that's lying there, and everyone would be prancing around just being animalistic or living in another society. Also, let's not forget this, that we live in a unique time in human society. And like you said, yeah, it captured an era, but it was capturing a time in human society that I would liken to the Vietnam era. See, the Vietnam era, I think, is a perfect example because during Vietnam, people really believed their government, brother. If their government said, "Oh, they're communists in the jungles of Vietnam," well, of course, we have to go confront them because they're going to try and take over the world. They're going to ruin nighttime television. They're going to nationalize everything, and nothing will no freedom anymore. And people believe that. And so they began to believe that a guy named Timothy Osman, that used to work for the CIA, now known as Osama bin Laden, was solely responsible for all of these things that took place. And there was no nefarious backdoor dealings, which there always are. There wasn't the presence of another empire, which is Britain, which caused this situation. And I think by causing it, I mean that it sets up all of its post-colonial territories to fail in a way that's very similar. It divides them according to sometimes racial, sometimes religious and cultural lines. And at first, it puts all these people together that existed amongst each other, but forces them to be together in a way that makes them uncomfortable. And later on, when it provides so-called freedom, what it does is set these entities up to fight against each other. And what you get is the idea that colonialism, and more specifically in this case, European colonialism, was the highlight of civilization for those places, without people forgetting the thousands of years of history, whether it's Central Asia or the Middle East, that those places have, and the achievements in math and science, and understanding that technology and history is not linear. And simply because the United States has built a series of better killing machines right now doesn't mean that that's the place it'll be in 2,000 years. Look where we were if you lived in Italy and Rome. Where the fuck, if you live in Italy and Rome, there's not even Italian people making pizza. It's all Egyptian immigrants and other people. Like this is your society is run by. This is what you are as a Roman. Okay, you don't run anything. You don't even run Italy. But you were the centerpiece of an empire that ran most of Europe and parts of Africa and the Middle East and even Persia. And it's insane to think that. But here we are. And what we have to focus on is the survival of our human society and of the decency within us to each other. Because without that, we'll lose who we are as a human race, and we'll continue on in some sort of like manufactured and purported humanity, which is what we're developing into.
Computerized
and whether that's
humanity living
secular
inside of a
or whether
dome.
that's because of religion is another debate.
I mean, you talked about computerized humanity living inside of a dome. And I'm sort of going to mess with you the whole while because we love you. You want to take this broad spectrum image of humanity and you want to be able to export that to everyone. You see that happening already on the left and the right. I mean, the left-right paradigm has started to end because in America, in my humble estimation of things, the Republican, Democrat, the two-party paradigm has worked up until now. I think Donald Trump broke that mold in the sense that people sort of lost their minds on both sides of the aisle. And I don't mean this in the Trump mania sense of orange man bad or any of that thing. What I mean is that this realization that both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. So you talked about the two wars of the Republican Bush, but then Obama comes up with his 7 wars of smart wars. He calls them smart wars. That's the smart war doctrine. And it keeps getting worse and worse and keeps ramping up. And there is a common thread between the left and the right in America now, even in Europe as well, that maybe the left-right paradigm really doesn't exist. Because you see a lot of people on the right have started to give up on their ideas about capitalism even because they're realizing that they're hurting. They hurt through the Obama administration, they hurt through Trump, and now they're hurting now after COVID and with these forever wars. So for the first time, I see that Republican voters in America don't want to go to war. But now I see that the Democratic establishment wants to go to war in Ukraine. Yeah. It's just completely, for me, it's so confusing because I grew up with the certain image with Bushisms and the Republican voter and the Tea Party and the sort of very crazy sort of right that existed in America.
Right.
And now I feel that the script has flipped.
Yeah.
So it's a very strange, like where the left and the right to me are now almost like a circle as opposed to a straight line.
I think it's interesting because the one thing that doesn't change in any of that is that the right wing has been running on the same platform for 225 years of free speech. And yet only recently have they understood a few of the more intricate aspects of like human society and development and in terms of what they've accepted, right? Before they wanted to change humanity with, this idea of American exceptionalism, that we're somehow more moral than the rest of the people. And it's almost like one of these big buildings somewhere else in the world that someone started and just never finished that we're looking at. And in terms of Republicans and Democrats switching, I think it's interesting because during that era, I remember very clearly, and I appreciate you bringing that up, that Democrats acted as if they were anti-war. To me, that's more surprising than anything else because those people never met a war that they didn't like. And I think that what's sad about it is that now right wingers have adopted, in this little switchover, have adopted the premise that they care about subversive politics, that they're counterculture, right? All of a sudden, I'm bucking the system. No, you're the system. And now you're bucking the system as yourself. You're trying to overthrow the system. You're a revolutionary. No, you're not. You're a pasty person in a suit that is presenting the ideas of rich people to a platform that's digestible for the plebeian public, and that's what your job is. We don't get news in this country. We have the opinions of rich people that are translated by human teleprompters to the masses in the hopes that they'll take the bait and actually start thinking that way. Now, whether it's from the right or for the left, they affect people in different ways. But one thing is stable, that in America, there's a growing movement of zealotry. And people call it, the American Taliban, Al Qaeda, the Al Qaeda. They make fun of these people, but realistically, I'm never in a position to take anyone lightly who has extremely strong beliefs that are backed by things that can't be proven. And those people, whether they choose one religion or another, are dangerous, and I'll tell you why. Because they're the first one to violate the tenets of their faith. They're the first ones to kill somebody else and say, I justify this with the Bible or the Quran, or through my history of controlling this area 2,000 years ago in, in the sense of what's going on in Gaza. I think that those people are the greatest hypocrites in my mind, because they want that legality of God, Christian Sharia for everyone else except themselves. It's always the same way. Whenever I run into religious fanatics, I always remember it's not the life that you want everyone to live for the sake of their morality. It's the life you want everyone to live for the sake of what you think morality is. And I think that is the most difficult question. How do you force that? And then what becomes the benchmark for morality? What is it that makes a person moral and correct? In our society, we have the ability to give charity, right? And I say, oh, wow, what's one of the pillars of Islam? Zakat, that's amazing. But here's an interesting question that I posed when I was in Qatar. I was invited to Georgetown to speak. And I said, if you give $10 million in charity, but you know that you're going to get $20 million in tax breaks, and it is. It's not maybe, it's guaranteed. It's not zakat anymore, is it?
No.
It's not charity. Now the people, here's the philosophical conundrum for all of us and your audience to consider. The people that are getting that $10 million, man, they'd be starving without it. They're suffering and they're hurt, and it's technically charity for them, but it's not really charity for me. It doesn't come from a place where I'm losing anything for nothing. I'm gaining, as a matter of fact. It's a business transaction. And that's what capitalism has done effectively. Turned it into a business transaction. Make a Ponzi scheme that was invented in the 15th century seem like the only option that people have. And if you could make a critique of what the left is, because unfortunately, I don't think we have a clear definition of that in our society, if I could be honest. Because there are too many people that think anything left of hunting the people who are homeless for sport is communism. And I think that's a problem. Because if you have people in America that are calling themselves serious political scientists, or they even have a channel on YouTube, and they are purporting that Mr. Biden himself is a Marxist or he's a socialist, and I think that's laughable. But it's true. You're laughing too, because these individuals are in, I would call the new Napoleonic era, right? Like everyone's talking about the historical inaccuracies of the new Napoleon movie. But here's an interesting fact about Napoleon. He had a newspaper. He had a couple of newspapers. And the funny thing is, gentlemen, he was the editor of these newspapers. And he used to write these articles about himself or edit the articles that other people wrote. And if you read these ancient newspapers, he said, oh, Napoleon bravely dashes across the field while everyone else cowers waving his sword and going, you know what I mean? Think about that. Think about the ego and the audacity that it takes to write something like that. And you'll find that on right-wing YouTube. A whole bunch of Napoleon guy destroys liberal argument. This one shatters first-year college student in debate of lifetime. These people are Napoleons of their time. They're writing their own PR, which I think is amazing, because I always saw that as taboo, but that's just the par for the course now. And I think you're right in saying that the previous 9/11 could not have existed in this era because of social media. But I will say one thing. I think to compare what's going on in Gaza and now, even though they're totally different, and to use 9/11 as a comparison, I was at first against, and I was very critical of that. But now I think it's a perfect example, and I'll explain why in 30 seconds. At the end of 9/11, America had the goodwill of the entire world. Everyone felt sorry for them. People jumping out of windows, dying. Oh my God, how fucking horrible. Their people are dead. They're hit by jet fuel. Other people crumbled in a building. Everyone gave them benefit of the doubt. And within 5 years, they had wasted all that political capital. They had killed countless people in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and other countries. And they were angling to continue their operation in Iraq, which ended up costing the lives of 1 million people for absolutely no goals that you could present to me now that would make it worth it in any way, shape, or form. And most people in America agree with that, which is amazing, because where did all these cowards that were rubbing their pussy to dead children for 15 years, where did they all go? Are they all hiding behind Mr. Trump's skirt? Because we know you're still there. You're in the party. You have a voice. You had one for years because your voice made those atrocities possible. But if you look at it, same thing has happened here. In the course of this time, everyone said October 7th, horrible, man. Even if it's in context of a 75-year occupation, man, this is terrible. And then in the course of not 5 years, but 5 days, we showed the world that, indiscriminately bombing women and children is something that they're willing to stand by, and that they don't think it's a genocide. And when people say, oh, how could it be a genocide? You say, well, how about this? What if we purport that not a single innocent civilian was killed on purpose? Right? What if we're willing to give you the so-called moral high ground that people expect they started the argument with, especially if they're a Zionist, right? I started the argument with the moral high ground. Okay, let's say you didn't kill a single person on purpose. You destroyed 300,000 homes on purpose. Imagine that. Imagine going to Lahore or New York City or Jalalabad or any other place, any place in the world, any place, Kabul or Paris, or any capital in Moscow, and you take away 300,000 people's homes with no shelter, no food, no protection from the elements, and on top of that, you're raining white phosphorus on them. Not only, listen, just making those people homeless is already a crime, right? Already making those 300,000 people homeless, of which about roughly 3% are going to die. That's already a crime. That, in that sense, is already a crime. And you did it purposefully, and you don't deny at all that you wanted to get rid of those houses. Matter of fact, you're proud of getting rid of those houses. And you said, matter of fact, we warned everyone in the house. We even sent you a message, a phone call, and some leaflets we dropped on you like it was fucking Tokyo in 1944. We dropped leaflets and told you we didn't want you here, and if you don't get out, you might die. Now, none of you were killed on purpose, but all of your homes were destroyed on purpose. I think people forget to read in between the lines, and they can see the objective of a person is very different than what they say. And that's the masterful work of politics. Getting what you want without saying what you want to get, right?
I mean, you're right in the sense that Trump's anti-war stance and then the right that was supporting that anti-war stance, it was not a principled stance. It was a practical concern when it came to the Ukraine-Russia war. It was a practical concern when it came to invading Syria. But the moment that the Zionist lobby, gave the go-ahead for the genocide in Gaza, you see not only Trump, but you see the whole roster of the Democratic and Republican Party, vying for the presidential seat right now in lockstep. They all say, Israel has a right to defend itself, and they're falling over themselves. And in this strange, I would describe it as navel gazing, universal navel gazing event in New York and in universities in California. Jewish students are not safe over there. You have all these white cosmopolitan politicians not feeling safe in the streets of New York. It's not the Gazans that are in trouble, right? It's these white people. It's these warmongers in America who are not feeling safe in universities and in the corridors of power.
I think one other thing that you bring up by saying that is the idea of projection. And that's very important, because I think, especially if we're talking about this occupation, it's the only occupation, the only brutal military occupation where the people that are doing it are presenting themselves to be the victims, right? The Romans never, hey, we're the victims. Salahuddin never, I'm the victim. No, you're the victim. You're going to get kicked out of here, and I'm going to take your land back to who it belongs to originally, or the Mongols. They never said, oh, we're the victims here. No, you're definitely on the menu. And I think that's the interesting part, that we've reached a point in society where people are no longer proud of being the great conquerors and doing things the way they used to. Now, 1,000 years ago, people would say, oh, no, I laid waste to those Palestinians. Yeah, I sold all their people into slavery. And we would think, hey, that's exactly how people thought 1,000 years ago. But here's the tick. And this is the part that's sad about our human society. That's not how they're going to think 1,000 years ago. That's how they're going to think 1,000 years from now, when whatever we have left of whatever society this is crumbles and we're forced to rebuild for whatever reason it is. And maybe, just maybe, if any of my work survives, I can give people a warning and an understanding that we've been through this before. We did this again. And if you want to go down this path, then that's why you'll be stuck in the same cycle again. For example, when I called the album The Middle Passage, for years, people have asked me, what happened with that record? It's going to come out eventually. But when people ask me, is it about slavery in the past? And I said, no, here's the sad part. I don't think slavery is the history of humanity. I think that it unfortunately will be the future of humanity. And that's nothing that's happened now has made me change my mind. As you said before, brother, when Mr. Trump came in, he purported to be anti-war. He didn't start any wars, but he continued them all heartily. 18 months after he was elected and brought into power, the drone strikes that Obama was so famous for continued. So I think that it needs to bear in mind that as much as they purport to be different than each other, when it comes to the hegemony of the United States and the United States relationship with Israel, they're all on the same page. And I think it's because they have to be. The United States has, I want to say, about 12 to 20 bases, independent bases, for its own military inside Israel. I think people don't know that, but the United States, I think that there's a lot of these negative anti-Semitic tropes that affect people online. And I always say that whenever you believe hateful words about people, be careful, because what you believe may actually throw off your understanding of context. It's not that Israel controls America. It's not the tail that wags the dog. It's not Jewish people in Washington pulling. No, the United States controls Israel. It tells them what to do. It does things that America can't do. And I said that in one of my other lives. I gave a perfect example. When the United States was backing Iraq against Iran, documents that were recently released from the Reagan administration proved that we didn't want Iraq to win. This country just wanted those two countries to decimate each other, so neither of them would be a regional threat to any design that we had. Now, because Iraq enjoyed a special relationship with the United States, it used this relationship to leverage power enough to buy a nuclear reactor from France, right? They wanted nuclear energy. That way they could focus on selling all their oil, right? The way the Russians did in the boom of the USSR when they were still making money. You say, oh, we'll use the uranium to power our cities and everything, but we'll sell the oil and we'll become rich. Okay. So since the U.S. couldn't bomb them directly because they were supplying them with weapons, at that very exact time, to go to war with Iran, the United States gave the location to the Israeli Defense Force airstrike capability on the front line, and they destroyed the nuclear reactor. Now, that's something we wanted done, but we weren't able to do it, and so Israel did it. So whenever I hear things that say, oh, Israel wants a regional war and the United States doesn't, well, they don't do anything that we don't tell them what to do. And if we want a regional war, it's because we think we're in a position to win. We think that Russia's way overstepped, that it's bogged down in the Ukraine. It doesn't have the ability to reinforce its proxies in the Middle East the way it used to. You know, Iran is not in a position now where it was only facing one threat. Now it's facing a coalition of 10 different countries that are actively in the Red Sea. You know, we put the fleet there for a reason. We knew what the Yemeni were going to do. We understood, we calculated, why haven't they been hit yet? That's a wonderful question. People ask me that every day. Why haven't we hit the Yemeni? But what? No, listen, that may be a famine-starved country, but it is littered with weapons from that war. That's what happens when you have a war. That's what happened in Afghanistan. That's what we were planning. That's what the United States was planning. That's why whenever you hear these things, oh, Joe Biden is dementia and he left a bunch of weapons in Afghanistan. No, how about this? For the people that watch your show, why don't you do this? Google border incident Afghanistan. After we left Afghanistan, we had 3 border incidents where there was a firefight between the Taliban and between people that were in Iran. So we thought this was our gamble. We're going to leave a bunch of stuff there. There'll be eventually more hostilities between these two people, and they'll hurt each other even more. Imagine that. And if you don't think that's true, if you think, oh, technique, you're making this up. The whole reason we're in the Ukraine is not to free those people. If you watch the Republican debate, here the people say that the quiet part out loud. They said the Ukraine is useful in grinding down Russia's army. So imagine how you must feel as a Ukrainian person saying, wow, my existence is just for a political objective. My entire country was destroyed. 30% of this land is gone just to receive a political objective. Well, now they know exactly what it's like to be a person from Central Asia or a person from the Middle East whose lives were completely destroyed because someone else had a political objective.
I mean, to quote Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the leading Democratic candidate up until the war in Israel, in Gaza, he said that imagine Israel as a big aircraft carrier in the Middle East, and that it'll act as a bulwark against Russian and Chinese influence in the Middle East. This guy is so-called a principled anti-war guy. He wants to protect the American people from, vaccine injury. He wants to protect the American people from the environmental changes that are happening rapidly. At the same time, he's so-called an anti-establishment candidate. With what happened to his uncle and his father, you would assume that he would know the price of freedom. But this guy is such a shill for the Zionist agenda. And like you said, left, right, Republican, Democrat, whatever, the forever war continues. The foreign policy program continues. The deep state, these faces change. And this is something that's very fascinating, I think, and Heather would agree with me, and maybe our more Pakistani audience would also agree, is that this is something we've known in the third world forever. In the global south, we've always known that you can change the government, you can change the leaders, but whatever the deep state wants to do with regards to its domestic and foreign policy, it's going to do. What I think uniquely, and this is pulling back to the original comment I made about the spectrum sort of looping in and becoming one big circle, is that I think the American people are starting to realize that it does not matter if they vote Republican or Democrat, which is why I think Donald Trump was a big FU for a lot of conservative people. Maybe they didn't get the big hurrah that they wanted, but for them, what it meant was that this is our way to signal to the deep state, to the permanent government, to the government bureaucrats, to the big billionaires, right? And this is a big, FU to you guys, and we don't give a shit about your program anymore.
Right, but
he turned out to be.
We're going to tell the billionaires FU by electing a billionaire. Right. And it's funny because I think that the guy, first of all, they both had a political makeover, right? Joe Biden had one of the biggest political makeovers in history. He went from being an authoritarian racist old man to being like a fun-loving grandpa that was trying to somehow solve America's problems like a Disney movie.
Yeah,
right?
fighting corn
And
pop.
I think they're both layovers from the Obama administration. Mr. Biden is or was the vice president in kind of working in the shadows. And, I think when it comes to Mr. Trump and Obama, they kind of both set the stage for Biden in the sense that Mr. Obama made spineless liberals who never really did anything for anyone feel like they were progressives, like they were some kind of like they were the resistance, And I think Mr. Trump made stupid people feel smart and empowered. You're not a doctor. You're not a political scientist. You know nothing about the world. Some of you people think this is a flat earth and we're on a floating credit card in space. And you give individuals like that credence. And then we started the conversation with 9/11. One thing we should have told your audience from the gate is that America is still living in the shadow of the 9/11 effect. And the 9/11 effect is when all politics shifted to the right. So if you were middle of the line before 9/11, you're considered a leftist now, even though you have no characteristics of a leftist. You don't care about workers' rights. You don't care about insurance. You don't care about people getting ripped off by pharmaceutical companies. Those are positions that the right wing and these fringe groups have co-opted. But that was the leftist position. If you were some right wing asshole, now you're considered some middle of the line centrist. You know what I mean? Egalitarian. And if you were from the far right, those freaks, well, now you were just considered an everyday right winger. And I think that in many ways shapes the political atmosphere that you see in the United States now. People that can't come together. Why, brother? Because they don't even have a shared history, right? The propaganda has gotten so bad that if someone says that 2 + 2 = 4, right? Just to be angry, the other side will say, well, it might equal 5 in another dimension. Or, it's like arguing with a child. And I think that's what we've gotten. We've gotten to that kind of childish level of politics where even if it's bad and bad for the entire government and yet it's a goal that one party wants to achieve, the other will be obstructionist. And, it goes to show you that everything is for sale. When you look at Mr. Biden and him basically going back on the promises that he made to immigrants and people that worked all during COVID, the immigrants that worked all during COVID and held the country economically together. And now they're all going to be deported under this title. Why is he making this concession to Republicans? Because he thinks and he's calculating they're going to fast track his weapons to Ukraine and Israel, which is where his priority is now. And he's willing to sell out other people to make it happen. And that, unfortunately, is politics. I mean, if you want to hear a more brutal story, you can ask the Kurdish people how it worked out for them fighting ISIS for the United States for 3 years. Here, fight ISIS for us. And as a reward, we're going to do nothing while the Turkish government bombs you into oblivion and scatters your people to the wind. So I think
we'll do you one better. We'll fund and arm ISIS. We'll do you one better.
Right, there you go.
Right.
So I think, we're getting to a level where I think you're right. Americans are disillusioned, but I think more than ever, they're sticking to the script. A lot of them are. Some of them see Mr. Trump as the only one that's ever bucked the system, right? As opposed to someone who's more like a broken clock, who's right twice a day, but you would never set your watch to a person like that. And unfortunately, when you look at Mr. Biden, he represents a dilapidated, broken. It's not even the left. He's a center right. He was the center right of the Democratic Party. He was basically a very liberal Republican. And he was tasked to run with Mr. Obama as kind of this anchor to him. They thought, oh, this young, liberal black guy, where is he going to take the country? And no, he wasn't going to take you anywhere that they didn't tell you they were going to go. And the guy who ran against him, John McCain, if he had won, we would be up in arms. We would have called him a murderer
John
for
McCain.
the things that he did.
He wouldn't be up in anything because the arms.
Yeah, but at the same time, we thought that he was the warmonger. And it turned out that the one that we elected, and I think that's the part that people get twisted, that what people show you in politics is only a glimpse of what actually exists. And by that, what I mean is there's a great program that I watched as a little kid called I, Claudius, and it was about the inner workings of like the Roman Empire and the murders and the intrigues at court. And it's a great little series. At the time that it was happening, no one knew it was happening. It was a guarded secret that this person was really this person's father, or that they had murdered someone in secret. But these people held the highest positions of power. And I'm sure that all of these guarded secrets will eventually come out someday. It'll just be so far in the future that it won't be able to affect the people that did it. So I for the people that say, oh, wait 20, 30 years, and we'll find the truth out about everything that went on with the war on terror. We'll find out where the money was laundered. Men lie, women lie, but numbers don't lie. And there'll be some account eventually of what we did with those trillions of dollars. It may come to the fall of America. It may come to a complete revolution in the country. But at some point, we're going to get answers to those questions that people never wanted us to have. And it's going to be a sad day.
One thing that we often discuss sitting here in Pakistan is how, as young kids, when we looked at America, we thought of it as like this sort of bastion of free speech and, equal rights for all, and so on and so forth. And then, as we've gotten older, and as I would say that the world has gotten more and more interconnected, it started to seem like that. First of all, there's like this false dichotomy about with the regards to Republican Democrat. It's more so that there's a group of very powerful individuals. They are always in charge, as Aman put it. It's sort of, you can think of it like a permanent government, and they pick and choose which topics you are allowed to talk about. And from the outside, it seems like that there's a lot of freedom of expression, freedom of speech, because for example in Pakistan, you have that room that you have.
The Overton window is sort of very narrow.
It's very narrow, so you can you can't openly criticize certain segments of the government, for example. You could do that in the United States, but it seems like the lines are drawn in these corridors of power about what people can argue about, and those things you can argue your heart out. You can take it to the most maximum degree,
like gender,
for example. But then when it comes to like more serious things, it
Snowden.
seems like Snowden, for
Manning.
example, or Chelsea Manning, or what was the guy? Jeffrey Epstein. So stuff like that just gets you immediately shut down.
Israel also.
Yeah. So, what do you think? Because America's sort of foundation for its freedoms has always been that it's a democratic country that values the democratic process above anything else. But in regards to this,
America was founded as a republic. It's barely democratic.
I mean, it respects those principles within its own country, allegedly, but it doesn't respect those principles in practice anywhere else. And I think that if we're talking about like American democracy, I think it's interesting to point out some lesser known facts about the US. Whether or not it's a democracy, it can act like an empire in terms of its foreign policy, and therefore it transforms itself into one. And it has this kind of hybrid society where, yes, it's a republic in the sense that, there are elected officials that are supposed to come from the people to be part of this. But in a sense, what democracy without, a check and balance, like checks and balance systems, is really just, an office for hire. You've essentially created not a democracy, but a kleptocracy, a government of thievery, where people say, hey, man, if I can afford to pay for this, then I can create the laws that I want to. I can make it so me and my business is never taxed. I can make it so that I increase laws that affect you know, my my sector of society better for me, and I don't care how that affects other people. And I think that in a sense became kind of government for hire. And in many ways, there are some very beautiful things about this country, some things that it's achieved, and in other ways, I think that people are blind to how people achieve those things. They achieve them by threatening to overthrow this country. You know, if you talk about January 6th, people who love American politics love to bring up January 6th. But after World War One, did you know that there wasn't, 20,000 angry, fat, drunk white people in front of the White House? No, there was almost 300,000, right? 300,000 World War One veterans. And these people camped out all over Washington to remind people, you asked us to fight your great war, and then you stiffed us for our benefits afterwards. How dare you? We're going to overthrow this country if you don't give us some kind of pension. And eventually they worked out some kind of deal. I mean, there's a book by General Smedley Butler that covers that particular part of history. But, even the people that have shown the most loyalty to this government, which is why I think it's sad when I see, people that have to angle rage, right? So it's not enough to just say, hey, man, these soldiers aren't getting their benefits. But hey, you know why these soldiers didn't get their benefits? It's because of this immigrant right here. He took them and he came into this country. Meanwhile, the United States prints billions of dollars a year. Are you that fucking stupid that you think you didn't get your VA benefit money because they gave it to an immigrant? No, your VA benefit money went in the pocket of some politician. It has nothing to do with immigrants. They could print the money that you need 10 times over. They just won't because you haven't made enough noise for them to do that. If you build a national movement, it'll happen because we've created this society and therefore it's become a reactionary society. Not reactionary left, not reactionary right, just reactionary in general. For example, there's a water tower on the roof of my building. No one worries about that tower right now, brother. No one. But if it falls and kills someone tomorrow, you know what happens? Every water tower in this city will be checked, inspected. There'll be it all over the news. Is your building in danger? Could you be the next victim of this falling water tower? And there it'll be taken seriously. In the same way, you could be a victim of Al-Qaeda. You could be the next person to get blown up. So that's why we have to go kill these people in some land that you can't even pronounce and you don't even know where it is. But don't worry, we'll take care of that for you. By the way, if you want to come fight for us, we'll give you college that used to be free. How about that? We'll give you something in return for your military service that used to be free. And what I mean by that is that, state and city university, for the people that don't know, used to be free in the United States. And up until about the time that they killed the draft, and that's not a coincidence. So when they disillusioned the draft, they coincidentally started making people pay for city universities. And then a lot of other people had to just join the military. And now what we're dealing with is a quasi-militant society that wants to be open-minded, that wants to be some kind of bastion of free thought. But that can't exist in a vacuum. It has to exist in practice.
But do you think that American society can sort of find its way out through voting alone and through just honoring the democratic process? Like, what do you think needs to happen in order for there to be a sort of reformation?
All right.
Inside?
I'm going to say something, but it's not going to happen. You have to get money out of politics. You can't have super PACs that give people $300 million on the side and us expect to think that that's not pay for play. Now, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat in this country, pay for play is real. It exists. It's why you have the senators and congressmen that you do. But that's exactly the problem. Those people are not beholden to you anymore. Right? They don't think the water comes from you. They don't respect the water. They don't respect you. You're the water, but they don't respect you. They respect the person that controls the handle that is on the spigot. That's the person they respect. And the people who have that, unfortunately now, are multinational corporations, unions, other individuals that say, "Oh, I'm not paying any taxes. I want my problems heard first." And that's why they have the positions of power that they do. Is it possible for the American people to get it back? Yeah, but they'd have to get money out of politics, and that's damn near impossible. I think it hobbles on until it sheds its until it sheds its skin, until it no longer needs to be, this, shining republic, until it's like, listen, we're an empire. And this is what we're going to be.
I have a
And I
feeling,
think
by
we're
the
going to
way,
reach that level at
I
some
have a
point.
feeling, by the way, that the Christian Ayatollah is coming. That the serpent that has been put in charge of the country is coming openly. You, as a progressive, as a left-leaning person, you guys had a chance with Bernie, right? And I feel like,
Well, here's the thing.
Bernie's
It's not a question
Bernie's,
of progressiveness.
No, Bernie's been a real huge disappointment, don't you think? I mean, look at him on Israel right now. I don't know what.
I mean, he was a huge disappointment to people who thought he was that left.
I don't know.
never saw him.
I don't know. I don't know what the Zionist lobby has on him, but the way he's come out punching for Israel and all guns blazing. What about the Ron Pauls? What about the on the right and the left both? What about Jill Steins? What about these alternative characters? When will a third party be viable in America? When will the Libertarians or the Green Party or
There's
the
an old
whoever's-
saying. There's an old saying that a third party will always be the future of American politics.
somewhere
And
way
it's
in the
cool,
future?
but it's true. It's saying, hey, that's just never going to be the case. I will give you one example of where third party politics was extremely instrumental in shaping, the course of American politics, and that was a little known fact that the only people that ever got Israel to halt settlements were Eisenhower and George Bush the First. And George Bush the First did it very similarly to how Eisenhower did it. He said, if you don't stop these settlements, which are causing a regional issue, we're going to cut your loans. We're going to cut your funding. And Israel said, what? What do you mean? The $4 billion we get a year? You're not? Yeah, I'm talking about that. That's cut. And they were like, Jesus. All right. So they paused the programs for about, I think it was 16 months or something like that. And it's not a coincidence that the next election, President Bush ran against not one, but two Christian Zionists. One was a third-party candidate called Ross Perot that was very Trump-esque, right? Or I should say Trump copied pages out of his book, very populist, man of the people. But he took a very important state in Texas away from Mr. Bush. And the winner of that election cycle was another Christian Zionist, the man who would become president, Bill Clinton. So I think that when you look at these individuals, you have to understand that whether or not it's one party or another, they're committed to the framework of what American imperialism represents overseas. So irrespective of their positions domestically, that's the line that they have to toe. So it's not that he wants to fight for Israel. He's already signed up for that. It's like when you talk about the governments of Saudi Arabia and Jordan, you say, well, how come these Arab countries haven't come to the defense of this, of Gaza?
We know.
Right. And then you say, well, wait a minute. Here's an unfortunate truth. How many of Russia's allies have criticized the war in Ukraine? Very few, if none. Therefore, what do you expect of America's allies? You think just because they happen to represent the same people as those? They might represent the same people, but it's not the same government. And that is where you find a distinction very clearly, right? Look at the government of Saudi Arabia versus the people of Saudi Arabia and how they feel about Gaza. The government of Saudi Arabia is heading towards normalization.
I read a poll today just online. 96% of people in Saudi Arabia want there to be a ceasefire.
They're horrified by what they see. Yeah. Because it plays on their new. See, that's the other thing, brother. What you can show on this podcast, what you could show the visuals of some horrific act, those were gone. Americans were flying blind for years. They had these people were criminally ignorant to what their government was doing. They had no idea. And now they're beginning to awaken to the atrocities of what's happened, realize that women and children were raped in the dark, that people were killed for no reason, that these countries, these Arab countries, that the United States has as its allies served as places where they had black sites all during the war on terror. So that sicko that was harassing like an Egyptian
In New York.
falafel guy.
In New York, yeah,
The Muhabbarat. Yeah. Well, plenty of people became famous as the Muhabbarat when the United States shipped them to Egypt to be tortured, and then turned out to have nothing to do with anything having to do with 9/11. And I think that is a lesson that I learned in Afghanistan, that the CIA was paying either it was Northern Alliance people or other individuals that they were connected to. And I met some Northern Alliance people that are good people, but they said, no, there were people here that were selling people to the U.S. as if they were Taliban, they were Al Qaeda.
We have a Pakistani citizen.
It happened in Pakistan too.
We have a Pakistani citizen right now in America. She's in a mental institution. She's called Dr. Afia Siddiqui. She was a medical doctor from America, trained and everything. The Pakistani government sold her back into the thousands, and she went to Guantanamo. She was raped and beaten and tortured multiple times. When recently one of the senators from Pakistan tried to go and reach her, they're not giving him a visa. They don't let her sister, by the way, who's also a doctor. She goes every year from Pakistan to meet her, because now they've moved her from the black sites into like a mental facility, because they've basically broken her mind. They don't let them hug. She gets to meet her sister from through plexiglass, and I think that in no particular order, but people like you, people like Whitney Webb, people like Abby Martin, you have a lot of these journalists like Dan Cohen, a lot of progressive journalists, Glenn Greenwald, Max Blumenthal, all of these people. You're doing this job for the past 10, 20 odd years in America that I've always felt that the American people are the sweetest, simplest people on earth. They just live in this fantasy land where they have no idea what their government gets up to, with other regimes. And you mentioned Saudi Arabia. So people have no idea what, regimes in the third world do to their own people on the behest of the American empire. And I think if the American people knew more about these sorts of brutalizations, you had an opportunity with alternative media, right? Both on the left and the right. But you have people like Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson, all these clowns going around online. They had an opportunity to talk straight to the American people. Why do you think they dominate these online spaces? Like, you guys have been doing this job for like 20 years with your rap, with your music, with your art, with journalism, with hard-hitting activism. But for some reason, these Zionist shills from the alt-right or whatever, they get to represent the American people online. That is, so the alternative media that was supposed to be the watershed, right? That was supposed to be able to show these images to the American people. Why is it that even that space, that alternative space, gets dominated by the same media empire? This was supposed to be like YouTube wasn't supposed to be pay to play. Right. Facebook wasn't supposed to be pay to play.
I think like it's, you're right. But then again, it became a new television station. And therefore, it was designed for that. So if you build a new Hollywood because you think it's going to be less corrupt, tell me something. Is Bollywood not corrupt? Yeah, you built a new Hollywood. It's corrupt. It's all corrupt. It's all pay for play. You go to the film industry in Russia or India or any country in Africa. Is it going to be corrupt? Is it going to be pay for play? Yeah, because it was designed like that. I think the other part that you bring up in reference to look, we don't have to go for extremes in defining the position that people have as a leftist or a right person or a progressive. Those things don't have to be labeled on a person. I'll give you a prime example. In Latin America, if you believe that a miner, right, like a person that mines gold or some precious metal, if they deserve, I don't know, some percentage, some sizable percentage of the stuff that they take out of the ground, and the company doesn't, right? Then you're considered a communist. If you consider that the company should get 80% of everything, 90% of what comes out of the ground, you're considered a capitalist. And if you believe that those people should even have 10%, if you believe that the people who work in those fields and those mines should even have a fraction then you're considered a violent communist. They'll make that decision for you. So I think the labeling of people is not something that we label ourselves. That's what imperialists have begun. Oh, this guy's from the right, this guy's from the left. So they could identify who they think can be easily manipulated into some other angle, because their position is never to fight you, it's to angle you off, right? They have a revolution in the country with poor people. What are they going to do? Hire one half to go fight the other, of course. You know, they have a growing group of revolutionary black people in the country. Well, what should we do? I get it. You know what we should do? We should draft them in a war to fight these other proletariat Asian people. Great idea. So I think that the United States always has solutions for its problems that it sees, but I think those don't advance the morality of the nation. And in terms of how people see it as to whether it's communist or capitalist, look, I myself have always had a slew of criticisms for Marx, right? One, that I didn't need a European man to come to the dark jungles of Asia, Africa, or Latin America and explain to our people the complex concept of sharing and collectivism. We knew what that was for thousands of years. And to reframe it in a way that we have to go by your rigid rule system, that's the only way I can be a true leftist or a true representative of the people. It's almost like they've polluted every title that they could possibly give you. Humanitarian. Look at that. Now it's polluted. NGO. Oh, God, we all know that's polluted because, you know, it's where people wash
Shout out
money.
to Bill Gates. My boy
Right.
Bill.
It's where the way people wash money. Like we said in the very beginning of or earlier in the discussion, if you give 10 million to get 20 million, it's not zakat. It's business. You're doing business. And that's what these people are doing.
You know, Bill Gates
and when
made
charity,
Bill Gates made
right.
$500 million from Pfizer BioNTech.
And that, in a sense, is how you make money, by doing charity. You know, people don't forget that the NFL is a 501c3. It's a charity organization, right? That's how they get a lot of the tax breaks that they have. And I think that in many ways causes, or not that specifically, but that frame of mind where everything is for sale, where we're just trying to get around the system. You know, it's always going to leave somebody with the short end of the stick. At this point in American politics, it's immigrants. They're being blamed for everything. But if you look at the comments, you see, oh man, these immigrants are getting stuff they don't deserve. Then you say this should go to the homeless veterans. What about the people that fought for this country? Okay, you know what's really funny? Go to one of those posts where they build houses for homeless veterans, and they'll say, oh, these people had their shot. What the fuck? They're drained on the resource. Why don't you get a real job, asshole? Right. So it's the consensus is never going to be happy. So we don't think about pleasing them. We think about taking care of the people who need to be helped, not the talking points of devilish individuals who, regardless of how it's framed, are going to see some problem in helping people, right? Even though they got help. Right. That's the funny part, that they hate other people getting help when they got help. The GI Bill, every aspect of how America used to run 20, 30 years ago. You could buy a house with one medium income. All you had to put down was 2% on that fucking home. Jesus Christ. And look what we're living in now. A fucking an apartment in a slum in some shithole in the worst part of New York City is $350,000. $400,000. It's unconscionable.
And if BlackRock has their way,
people to exist in.
If BlackRock has their way, you won't even own that anymore. You won't own anything, and you'll be happy. It'll be ride share models and rent share models and Ubers, and everything will be rented out to you. You won't own a car. You won't own a house. Heck, you don't even own the clothes on your body. You can rent them. It's the game.
I mean, I think regardless of which side you pick, whether it's an extreme of the right or extreme of the left, you always end up there, right? And I think that there's a book by a historian called Diop, and it's Civilization or Barbarism, and it discusses like a a very interesting time, a Neolithic age in human history, which I think is underreported because we always start at Sumeria, we always start at ancient Egypt, but then you ask yourself, okay, well, what was around here 16,000 years ago? What else was here? And then you read about, the first people that domesticated the horse about, I think it's 16, 17,000 BC. And then you read about a society that existed in Europe that was run completely by women. And it existed in like a fertile crest valley not far from the Azov Sea. And these people existed in this gigantic valley for the better part of 3,000 years. Right? Imagine that. And one day it ended when the people who domesticated the horse came in and stole and burned and killed everything. So it really, we're stuck in this way of thinking that we want to create the most stable world, and yet nothing is stable in our world. And we're living on a little atom, hurling through space. And at any particular point, our sun could flare up and this shit'll get cooked like a marshmallow. So how about this? I'll leave people in your audience by saying, be nice to individuals, right? Be kind, be understanding, And if I can give people advice on how to get along in the world after we've discussed so many serious topics, I would say that an easier way to get through life is to assume ignorance from a person before you assume malice. Now, once you know this person, you can assume all the malice because you understand who they are, right? And you never really know a person until the moment that they don't get what they want from you. That's the first day that you actually meet them as a complete person. So whether it's your mother, your father, your brother, your best friend, the people that are in your life, until you say no to that person when they need something from you, you haven't really met all of them, right? You've just met most of them. And that's the truth. We only show a little bit of ourselves to people because if we showed them everything, they would think that we were more monstrous than we are, or maybe take us in a different light. And that's what social media has done to humanity. It showed everyone, all of us, not the friendly faces we like to show people when we're walking home, but those ugly racist things that people say, and those inhumane things that they can do to women and children, and those terrible things they do to people while they think no one is looking, right? In that sense, we draw the most from this. And as to your point, why don't people that speak the truth, get more of an audience? Or I think that is interdependent, right? Artistry and things of that nature are not just based on a linear time schedule. Those people who dominate the YouTube cycle in the future will be seen as the propagandists that they were. In the future, people will be able to not encrypt your email. They'll just open it up like we're opening a jar, and they'll find out that you got $12 million over the years to speak for this millionaire. And that's why you had the opinions that you did. Whereas these people did it because they felt in their heart of hearts that they were trying to do the right thing. So look, 2,000 years ago, there was a man called Tiberius, the most famous man in the world. He was a living god, right? And people worshiped him. He had statues. And at the same time that he existed, there was a Hebrew carpenter that people nailed to a cross for sedition, right? And if I ask kids in the street right now, anywhere, I said, man, who is Tiberius? They're like, who the fuck are you talking about? But if I ask people in the world, man, who is Jesus? Or even if I go to Pakistan, it's not a Christian country, I say, who's the prophet Isa? Everyone knows who he is. Everyone knows his story. Everyone knows that he stood for justice. He flipped over the money changing tables. He said it was easier for a camel to walk through the eye of a needle than it was for a rich man to enter the gates of heaven, right? These are the stories that we love. So while those people may dominate the news cycle today, I have a feeling that the work that I do will far outlast me and my life. And in a sense, that's why what I have is an immortal technique, not something for now for us to enjoy, but for people who watch this show, on a manufactured device that's barely holding itself together, 6,000 years from now, and say, what were people like back then? And then they'll get to hear, me and you guys having a conversation about what the world was like then. That's who we're talking to. And if we're really artists, then that's who our real audience is. It's not just the people now, but we're thinking about the people that may want a glimpse into what our world was like thousands of years from now or whenever. And that's who we're talking to as well.
So, Technique, before you go, one last question. And this is something that, we've had on our minds for quite some time. And initially, it came to my mind when I heard your track Fourth Branch. Uh, so at the end of that, there's like this monologue. And at the end of the monologue, you're like, turn off the TV and read, read. So you repeat it 3 times. And now I don't know if that was intentional or not, but it echoes the first revelation that the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam received from the angel Gabriel, who essentially told him to read 3 times. He repeated it 3 times, just like you did. So,
Yeah.
We've had this question on our minds for quite some time. There's been debate online. Are you Muslim?
Oh, get that question all the time. So I'll give you a brief history. I never took Shahada, right? But I read the Quran. I read a lot of the Hadiths, and I studied the history of Islam as I studied the history of Christianity. And one thing that I always thought was weird is how people in my family were so religious. They believed in Jesus, but they knew nothing about the time period in which he came from. They knew nothing about how the religion had developed. And one of the saddest things that I got from reading the history of Islam and the history of Christianity and the history of Judaism is that the people who created these faiths were people of extraordinary power in whatever way you want to interpret that. But they had incredible power. And the moment that they passed on, the moment that they ascended, or however you regard they're leaving this physical world, there is no doubt in my mind that their religion fell into the hands of lesser men. And unfortunately, people took their religion and took their faith and took the effect that they knew that it had on people, and they used it like a weapon. And in that way, they've desecrated the words of the Prophet Muhammad. They have abandoned the lessons of Jesus Christ, and they have turned their back on Moses, the lawgiver. And I think that when I said that, sure, we love to include imagery and things that I'm going through reading at the time, because at the time I was reading the Quran and I was like, oh man, this is an interesting part.
So it was intentional.
I think it's, yeah, sure. There's a lot of stuff that's intentional. That's like when people ask me, Al-Aqsa, the name is not coincidental. They say, what is that about?
Okay,
And I would say, well,
wait. Before you say that, Aman and I actually recently listened to that song and we came up with a theory. We looked up Al-Aqsa, what it means, and it means the furthest point. So the point of no return, basically.
right, in the sense that name is not coincidental, but
Yeah.
it's also a double meaning, because the point of no return for human society in that region will come when they try to disassemble Al-Aqsa Mosque. And I think this is a very real.
And I think we're at the cusp of it right now. I think you see the sort of very extremist
Look,
sort of Zionist.
in Israel, there's this. If you don't want to join the IDF, there's an alternative now. You can join something called the Temple Mount Society.
Yes.
And several people have spoke about this, and they've spoke about how this society is dedicated to the destruction, or rather they call it the removal and replacement of Al-Aqsa Mosque with the unearthed Temple of Solomon underneath, which they think was created. Now, remember that Solomon didn't rule alone, right? Solomon had Hiram Abiff, which was what they call the master builder, a person that designed ziggurats and shit like that, that could angle things so that they would receive light from the sun in certain ways. These are the rumors that people have. Now, whether or not it's true, he also ruled with another man called Zadok the priest, right? Zadok the priest, it's funny, if you watch Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade, the guy who those Nazis dress up as when they open the ark is supposed to be Zadok, the man who who helped Solomon create the ark. And when he says, "Oh, it's a telephone to talk to God," it's not a telephone. It's a listening instrument, so you can hear what God has to say and say, "Okay, God, this is what we're going to do." All right, nope, that's not you getting an intercom so you can bark at God and tell him what you want to do. And that I found so interesting. Those gems hidden inside. Like in the Torah, it says one of the worst things, that the greatest sins that a human being can commit is when it puts itself on an equal footing with God. And I read that again and again and again. And then there are stories that I read in the Quran that inspired me about a man that goes to hell and he lives there. And so he begs the Prophet Muhammad, can I please just get a glimpse of heaven? And, the Prophet Muhammad gives people glimpses of heaven that are stuck in hell. And this man gets a glimpse of heaven. And instead of being bitter and angry like everybody else, he said, no, I'm resigned to this place now. I can see the good things in life that I don't deserve because of my actions. And the man is redeemed, letting me know that even if you're in hell, even if you're in a miserable place that you've condemned yourself to eternity, God's eye is still on you. He can still see you. He still made you. And that story about the creation of the devil and of wickedness and of evil, I remind people that in all those stories, again, the devil is something that God controlled, that God made, that God created. And so in that sense, it's a test for you. It's a reflection of what you have, which is why we call it jihad. It's an internal struggle. It's a thing that's born from within. So only you know whether you stole that. Only you know whether you killed people in the night. Only you know what you did in secret behind closed doors. And that's the part that eats away at you. It's not some mystery being that comes to claim your soul in the middle of the night by crawling out from under your bed. It's you that slowly eats your heart and your soul away because you know what you did was wrong, because you know that you feel guilty for the things that you've done. And I think coming to terms with your faith, if you find it through Islam or through Christianity or Judaism, you come to terms with those things and you in a sense, not put yourself, you get a glimpse of godliness by forgiving yourself and by accepting the idea that you have to submit and lose your ego in order to really atone for your own sins. And I think that's the part that Christianity gets wrong. They say in this country, evangelicals have this idea that you just have to say you're sorry to Jesus and it's all forgiven. And they're forgetting the other half of Christianity, which is extremely important, which is you have to atone for your sins. Your sins cannot be forgiven if you simply just give it to Jesus. Oh, Jesus, let me throw this on your fucking lawn. Here's more sins. No. Here's a sin and a promise that I'm going to do better than what I did before, that I'm going to be a better person, that I'm going to make amends to the people that I hurt and the people that I did wrong. And at the same time, I think without that, then the whole story is lost, because they're all great stories, right? The guy comes back at the end, he saves the world, they all end in the same light. But again, I'm interested in all of those stories. So as much as I read the Quran, the Torah, the Bible, I read the Hammurabi Code. I wanted to read the mythology of the Sumerian people, which I thought was extremely interesting. Here's basically it's a story about aliens, that they existed on this planet before us. It's a story older than the Bible and the Quran and the Torah, and they were mining gold on this planet, right? Because it was so powerful. And one interesting thing is, no, but this is true.
I know, I'm messing with you.
This is not a farce. This is what they believe. And today's religion is tomorrow's mythology. Let's not forget that. That's the truth about human history. Today's religion is tomorrow. Whatever you think is so holy today, right? You're getting in a lot of trouble, just criticizing or insulting the Prophet Muhammad or belittling Jesus. People frown upon that now. But no one's going to get mad if you make fun of Zoroaster, right? Or Mithra. Or if you say, oh, hey, or less people will, because I'm sure there's some Zoroastrians out there. Or if you make fun of the Greek gods, because their sanctity is not protected because people have accepted that they're mythology. And in the future, the question becomes, will people accept that what we believed in was mythology? Or how will it be? Or how long do beliefs and society last, right? We're on the ass end of our human society. And we're wondering how much the ideals that we've preserved exist. Okay, well, those ideals are only as good as the people that hold on to them. So as long as you keep producing decent human beings, you'll still have that. But if you don't, then you'll have people that misuse the word and use it to gain power and control. Like I said, the moment somebody saw Islam and saw Christianity, even a stupid, wicked person said, "Oh wow, that's power. Look at the power. Look at the influence that this has on people. I want that power." Right? And in many instances, society has been governed by people like that, because it reminds me of the music industry. We'll take it full circle. In the music industry, there's this belief that you have to be talented. No, you have to be driven. I've seen plenty of people win with no talent. I've never seen a person win that wasn't driven.
Maybe they just had better marketing schemes.
Right. To the point where, there's an instrument that everyone loves in this country, a jazz trumpet. I used to play the jazz trumpet when I was a kid. If I took a person that's never played the jazz trumpet before in their life and I put them on stage with a professional, you would notice the difference. You gentlemen that are watching this show and your entire audience would say, "Oh my God, this guy is a fucking wizard." And this other guy, "What are you doing? Can you get a hook and get him off stage? Is there a tomato I can buy to throw at this man? This is awful." But in hip hop, since there's no gatekeeping, we have people who've never rapped before, don't know how to rap, that just basically created a song, put it on, and then and people love it, and that's it. And then
listen, SoundCloud rap has its own place. I mean, I will not stand for this kind of insult. All these people talking online. I mean, they have a space.
Yeah, I mean, I think look, there's genius that comes in all shapes and forms, and I would never talk down someone's ability to express themselves. I just think that there's no sense of what talent actually is versus what people say you can monetize.
Speaking of which,
in this day and age, anything could be.
When is your next album coming out? Because
oh man, and what a wonderful way to end this interview. No. So for the people that don't know, I've been working on a 501c3 that feeds elders in my community in Harlem. We call it Rebel Army Runs. You can find me at Rebel Army Runs. And at the same time that I was doing that, me and my father of all people, who I didn't have a good relationship with when I was younger, but as a grown man, I grew to accept that a lot of the things that he did were for the best of me. And, I learned to put to perspective a lot of his harsh upbringings, and we actually get along very well now.
Mashallah,
and so me and my dad, we built the studio. It took me realizing a lot of the things that I did wrong, and the fact that I was living like a criminal at that time, and that I was constantly carrying drugs and weapons. And when I looked at that, it was something my father said to me.
Methodology.
Yeah, it was something my father said to me that really connected with me one day. He threw me out of the house. And I was really mad at him for that. He said, you can get out.
How old were you?
And I was probably about 14, 15 years old. And he said, "I want you out." And I was mad at him for so many years for that. And I remember his reasoning to me. And my father was in the Peruvian military when he was really young. And he said, "Listen, if there's a submarine and there's a hole in one of the hatches on the side, I have to close that hatch." He said, "It may cost the lives of 12 men, but if I don't close that hatch, it threatens the integrity of the entire sub, and 115 men will die." He said, "So you're my firstborn son, and I love you more than anything else." He said, "You're an example of everything positive." He said, "But you cannot threaten the integrity of this family by having those things in this house. I don't know who would come looking for that. I don't know what kind of problems you have with people. I can't endanger my wife and the other children that are here, your brothers and sisters. So I want you to get the fuck out." And I left, and I was heartbroken. And I carried that anger for so long until I was sitting in prison. And I told this story to somebody. And to my surprise, the man said, your father was right. And you needed to be here in this miserable fucking dungeon, living off 2 meals a day,
Looking at
in
the
a
world through a
cage,
crack.
for you to get that your father was right. Right? And it's true. Everything that I say, I've said, I've lived at some point. You know, every time that you quote something from a lyric of mine, it's something that I went through. It's something that shaped the perspective that I have.
I'm
And
sorry if we
that
overdid
helped
that
me
part.
find my dad. Helped me find.
We're glad though that you didn't shoot it out to get clapped because
Hey man,
we love you
never
here.
know. Hey man, we're talking about the future. Who knows how people end? But hopefully we have a positive ending, right?
It's gonna have a beautiful ending that you've reconciled with your father and your siblings, and it's perfect. It's beautiful, mashallah.
So we built a studio, and we'll be recording the rest of the record that I have in that studio. So I have a few songs that are actually completely finished, and then I have a couple that could use some work. So I'm looking forward to next year, and I'm already slated to release a new song. So, you know, if people like it, then that means that there'll be more songs. So I hope you guys like the first song. So there could be more songs, and we'll keep them coming.
For sure, we'll be.
And hopefully, when I release the record, I can come back on the podcast too.
Definitely, man. For sure.
That would be an honor,
Sir. I promise this is the last thing I'm gonna ask you.
That's all right.
This is the last thing I'm gonna ask you. You know, Aman alluded to it earlier. You did like this song with DJ Green Lantern, called I think it was called Bin Laden, where the hook literally is Bin Laden didn't blow up the projects, and you know, Bush knocked down the towers.
It was taking a sample from Mos Def's freestyle.
Yeah, I took
and then he was Eminem's DJ at the time, so he sampled Eminem at the end.
At the end. So, you know, I imagine like it's not a very popular position to hold in America. You know, over here in Pakistan, everybody's like, yeah, for sure, obviously Bush knocked down the towers. What do you think? Do you think 9/11 was an inside job? I've always wanted to ask you this.
You personally, by the way.
Yeah. Before I go, I'll say it like this. When people say, hey, what's your crazy conspiracy theory about 9/11? Well, if you listen to Volume 2 closely, I don't have one. I didn't say that there was a nuclear explosion inside. I said what it looked like. I said what this was. I put a theory forward that the government lied to us, and I stand by that theory. Now, how they lied to us and what the extent of their lies were, I think that I am humble enough not to purport to know the exact reasons. But I will say this. I know that they lied because they lied about the air to breathe. And I know that because a lot of my friends were in the military at that time, and they were forced to guard the southern part of Manhattan. So after 9/11, a little known fact is that you weren't allowed to go to the south of Manhattan, that it was under like military occupation. Like there were checkpoints, there were Humvees, soldiers in New York City. We had never seen that before. We're used to seeing cops. We saw soldiers, M16s, people in little machine gun. They really thought like you guys said it before, they really thought we were under attack. Every day was going to be like fucking Beirut in the 80s. And that's how they really thought. And so they prepared themselves for this never-ending onslaught. But what actually happened is that this government lied to all those people. And it said that the air was safe to breathe when we found out later that it wasn't safe to breathe. And plenty of my friends and people I know have died of respiratory illnesses, or they're fighting some of the most horrible ones, and they can't breathe. They've barely beaten a lung cancer. So I don't want to hear from anyone that this government told the truth. The other little tidbit fact about 9/11 is, you know how they identified Muhammad Atta. Now, this is the truth. This is why I tell people it's important to read Mark Twain and the originals who are like American literary icons. Not because the stories were so great. Who gives a fuck about their stories? The reality is that you get gems from the inner workings of their writing, where Twain says that writing the truth is harder to write than fiction. Why? Because when you write about what really happened, you have to make it seem believable, because the truth is so outlandish that it doesn't make any sense. 16 people from Saudi Arabia, a guy from Egypt and Lebanon, hacked a jet and with a bunch of box cutters. And in response, we destroyed 2 countries that had nothing to do with it and damaged 10 others in the process. That makes no sense, right? And you know how we identified Mr. Mohammed Atta, getting back to the original point, is they found his passport intact after an explosion of the caliber that I saw on television, where a plane went through a building and blew up, and it wasn't even singed. And the sad part is this. I'll end with a sad story. I had a friend of mine, she went to college, and she got really quiet after 9/11. I said, what happened? And she said, my best friend died. I said, how? How? What? She said she's going to work in front of the World Trade Center. And she said that she was hit by building debris and jet fuel, and it burned 90% of her body. And she lived for 3 days in a hospital fighting for her life and then died. And what's sad is that that woman represents the truth. It gets seen for one split second of time. Everyone acknowledges what it is. And then it dies alone in a room by itself days later, away from the public. You know, I love you people. I love your fans. I appreciate you guys having me on the show. And I tell people, man, dig for the truth, even if it's messy, even if it hurts you to read, you know, even if it challenges your narrative of the world. You know, it's never too late to educate yourself and become a better person. And you know what? Call your mother, right? If you're still lucky enough to have your mother in your life, man, call your mom. That dude that's walking around aimlessly in the background, tell him to call his mother too. You know, she would love to hear from you, and it would probably make her night or your grandmother's night. And I'm lucky enough that my mom beat cancer twice, and she just beat another round of cancer now, which makes it 3 times. So I consider myself blessed to have my mom in my life. And that's why I tell you people, please, you know, appreciate it to the full extent and then beyond, because see, this is the part where you were actually supposed to have your line, brother. See, you've been quoting me this whole time.
God damn it.
Appreciate them to the fullest extent and then beyond, because you never really know what you got
Until it's gone.
There you go. Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate you guys.
Thank you so much for coming. This was amazing.
If you want to find me, I'm online on Twitter, Immortal Tech, and I'm on Facebook at Tech Immortal, and IG on Tech Immortal. And I appreciate you guys, and please let me know when the episode drops so I can put it out to my fans too.
For sure. Thank you so much for coming, and we hope to have you
I
on
appreciate
again.
you, gentlemen.
Bye-bye.
Peace, gentlemen. Thank you so much.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.